To the world, he was a general of the Austrian Empire, but to four children, he was simply father. This is the story of Archduke Ernst's 40-year double life and the secret he fought to protect until his death. So how did a prince, destined for a life of service to the order, end up living a double life of such rebellion? His story begins not with deception, but with his birth. Born on August 8, 1824, in Milan, Archduke Ernst was a prince of one of Europe's most powerful dynasties. He entered a world defined by the Age of Metternich, an era of rigid conservative order designed to suppress the very notions of liberalism and personal freedom. This political climate of secret police and widespread censorship was felt nowhere more acutely than in his birthplace. Milan, the heart of the Austrian Empire's Italian territory, was a golden cage, a prized imperial possession vital for its wealth, but to its Italian inhabitants, a city under occupation, simmering with the quiet fire of nationalism. From birth, Ernst was groomed for a life of uncomplicated service to this complex and dangerous world of beautiful surfaces and treacherous undercurrents. His father, Archduke Rainer Joseph, was the kingdom's viceroy. He was a grandson of Holy Roman Emperor Leopold II, a man steeped in the Habsburg belief in absolute rule and bureaucratic order. As viceroy for 30 years, Rainer administered the territory with a firm paternalistic hand. He oversaw economic development and maintained a lavish court at the royal palace in Milan. But behind the facade of balls and operas, his administration was an instrument of imperial control, enforced by a network of spies and the constant presence of Austrian garrisons. In the streets of Milan, secret societies like the Carbonari plotted for a united Italy, a movement that would come to be known as the Risorgimento. Ernst grew up breathing the air of this tension, a prince of a ruling house that many of his neighbors considered a foreign tyrant. The contradiction was made flesh and blood in his own mother. Princess Elizabeth of the illustrious House of Savoy was the embodiment of the very Italian nobility his father's administration sought to control. In one of history's great ironies, her own Savoyard family would, within a generation, lead the military campaigns that would expel the Habsburgs from Italy and forge the modern Italian state. Her position was one of impossible complexity. A Savoy princess married to the Austrian governor, raising Habsburg children on Italian soil. She navigated this fault line with grace, infusing the household with a Mediterranean flair. She hosted salons where Italian was spoken as freely as German, and the music of Italian opera composers like Gioacchino Rossini filled the halls. For her children, she was a living link to the culture of the land they inhabited, a culture their father was tasked to rule, not embrace. This constellation of conflicting loyalties and life choices was even more vivid among Ernst's siblings, who each navigated the pressures of being a Habsburg in their own distinct way. Their paths highlight the limited options available and make Ernst's own choices all the more profound. His older brother, Archduke Leopold Ludwig, was the heir apparent to their father's position and fortune. He walked the path of perfect conformity. He pursued a distinguished military career, and in 1864 secured an approved high-stakes political marriage to Princess Leopoldina of Brazil, a granddaughter of two emperors. This union was a classic Habsburg maneuver, strengthening ties with a rising empire in the New World. Leopold bore the full weight of expectation, his life a public testament to dynastic duty. In stark contrast was his younger brother, Archduke Heinrich Anton. He chose open, scandalous rebellion. Heinrich entered into a morganatic marriage with a singer, Leopoldine Hoffmann. It was a love match that horrified the court. Marrying an artist was one thing, but doing so with little attempt at secrecy was a direct challenge to the emperor's authority. The marriage was eventually recognized, but Heinrich and his wife were largely ostracized from the highest circles of the court, a constant reminder of the price of public defiance. Other siblings followed more conventional routes. Archduchess Maria Caroline entered into a perfect dynastic marriage, wedding her first cousin, the politically ambitious Archduke Rainer Ferdinand. Theirs was a Habsburg power couple. Rainer Ferdinand would go on to become minister-president of Austria, a central figure in negotiating the great Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867 that reshaped the empire. His life was one of constant political maneuvering under the intense scrutiny of the Vienna court. This family backdrop is crucial. It shows that Ernst was surrounded by models of conformity, open rebellion, and political engagement. His brother Leopold showed him the rewards of obedience. His brother Heinrich showed him the cost of public defiance. His brother-in-law Rainer Ferdinand demonstrated the all-consuming nature of high politics. Ernst would choose none of these paths. Instead, he would forge a fourth way, a life of outward conformity that masked a rebellion more secret and perhaps more radical than any of theirs. He mastered languages essential for an officer in a multi-ethnic empire: German for command, Italian for the province he lived in, Hungarian for the lands he would later serve in. But his most profound education took place outside the classroom. It was in the cultural salons hosted by his mother, where he developed a deep appreciation for art and literature. It was in observing the intricate, often hypocritical etiquette of his father's court, and it was in witnessing the raw realities of imperial rule. As a boy, he saw the devastating cholera outbreaks of the 1830s sweep through Milan, forcing the royal family into quarantine and revealing the fragility of life for the common people. He witnessed the fear in the eyes of officials after news of revolutions elsewhere in Europe arrived, and the subsequent tightening of censorship and surveillance on the streets. These experiences cultivated in him a sense of noblesse oblige, the duty of the nobility to care for others, that sat uneasily with the dynasty's often repressive image. Historians argue that such upbringings on the empire's periphery often produced archdukes more attuned to local sentiments, creating internal conflicts unresolved by Viennese centralism. In essence, his background blended privilege with precariousness, tradition with transformation. It forged a man who understood the language of power but was fluent in the nuances of culture, a man trained for absolute loyalty but possessed of an independent mind. It set the trajectory for a life of dutiful service shadowed by a profound and dangerous personal defiance. The path preordained for a man of his station was the military. For a Habsburg archduke, the army was not merely a career. It was an extension of the dynasty itself. The Austrian Imperial Army was the iron framework that held the multi-ethnic empire together, a force whose loyalty was not to a nation, but to the emperor alone. It was into this world of rigid hierarchy, iron discipline, and unwavering loyalty that a young Archduke Ernst was commissioned. His career would not only define his public identity, but also, paradoxically, provide the very shield for his private rebellion. His ascent through the ranks was swift, as befitted his royal blood. By 1845, at age 21, he was a colonel in Milan, and by 1847, a major general. He was being groomed for high command, positioned for active service just as the political foundations of Europe began to tremble. The age of Metternich, with its conservative order, was about to be consumed by the fires of revolution. The 1848 revolutions provided his first major test. In Milan, the city of his birth, the simmering resentments of the Italian populace erupted into open revolt in an event known as the 5 Days. Church bells rang the alarm as citizens, from artisans to aristocrats, tore up cobblestones to build barricades. The Austrian garrison was suddenly an enemy army in a hostile city. For Ernst, this was no distant political event. He was ordered to lead troops against the very people he had grown up amongst. It was a brutal introduction to the harsh realities of imperial power. Under the command of the legendary 81-year-old Field Marshal Radetzky, Ernst learned the bitter art of counterinsurgency. He managed disciplined rearguard actions during the strategic retreat from Milan to the Quadrilatero, a system of 4 heavily armed fortresses that formed the bedrock of Austrian power in Italy. Radetzky famously promised, "In 3 days, we will be in Milan again," and he was true to his word. The Austrian counteroffensive was swift and brutal. Ernst likely saw action at the decisive Battle of Custoza, where the Austrian army crushed the forces of the Kingdom of Sardinia, reaffirming Habsburg dominance. In 1849, his reputation as a capable and unflinching field commander was solidified when he led a successful combined land and sea assault on revolutionaries in the port city of Livorno, earning him the prestigious Military Merit Cross. The 1850s saw his career shift from the battlefields of Italy to the complex administrative challenges of the empire's eastern territories. He was stationed in Pressburg, modern-day Bratislava, and later, by 1858, transferred to Buda as commander of a cavalry corps. These postings were strategically vital for the empire, which was still reeling from the massive Hungarian Revolution of 1848. His task was to oversee a tense peace in lands where loyalty to Vienna was thin and resentment ran deep. But these postings, far from the prying eyes and incessant gossip of the Viennese court, were a blessing in disguise. They provided him with the autonomy and discretion needed to build a second life. A cavalry command, in particular, offered a unique freedom. It was a mobile force, giving him legitimate reasons to travel frequently and maintain separate households without arousing suspicion. While his brother-in-law Rainer Ferdinand was navigating the treacherous corridors of power in Vienna, Ernst was on the vast plains of Hungary, inspecting garrisons, overseeing maneuvers, and managing a life that was increasingly his own. His command of thousands of horsemen gave him operational independence and the financial means to support a family the empire could never know. His duty provided the perfect cover for his secret. The ultimate test of his military career and a turning point for his entire generation came in the 1866 Austro-Prussian War. This was not a regional uprising. It was a showdown for the soul of Central Europe. The rising power of Prussia, under the shrewd leadership of Otto von Bismarck, sought to expel Austria from German affairs forever. The conflict culminated in the catastrophic Battle of Königgrätz. At this monumental battle, Ernst commanded the Third Army Corps. The Austrian army, though brave and steeped in tradition, was an artifact of a bygone era. They faced a modern professional Prussian army equipped with the revolutionary Dries needle gun, a breech-loading rifle that could be fired 3 to 4 times faster than the Austrian muzzle loaders. Austrian tactics, based on courageous but suicidal bayonet charges, were tragically outdated. The result was a slaughter. Ernst and his troops fought tenaciously amidst the chaos and carnage. They were positioned at the center of the Austrian line and endured withering fire for hours. Though defeated along with the rest of the Austrian forces under the hapless General Benedek, Ernst's leadership was noted for its steadiness. He held his unit together, preventing a complete rout and allowing for a more orderly retreat. He had performed his duty flawlessly, but he had done so in the service of a catastrophic failure. The defeat at Königgrätz was a national humiliation. It shattered the myth of Austrian military supremacy and effectively ended its role as the leading German power. Following the war, Ernst received his final promotion to General of the Cavalry in 1867, a recognition of his steadfastness under fire. But a year later, in 1868, at the relatively young age of 44, he retired from active service. Some generals were scapegoated for the defeat. Others, like Archduke Albrecht, dedicated themselves to the monumental task of military reform. Ernst chose a different path, a quiet withdrawal. This was not the act of a disgraced commander, but a deliberate choice. He had served the empire loyally for nearly 3 decades. He had seen the brutality of urban warfare, the complexities of governing restive provinces, and the horror of a modern industrial battlefield. He had witnessed the empire's arrogance and its ultimate humiliation. His deliberate turn away from both politics and military reform can be seen as the act of a man who had decided to prioritize his private world. His long and dutiful career had served its purpose. It had given him honor, wealth, and most importantly, the perfect cover for the secret he would now dedicate the rest of his life to protecting. It was during his military postings in Hungary, far from the rigid scrutiny of Vienna, that Archduke Ernst's life diverged forever from its prescribed course. The Hungary of the 1850s was a proud and restive land, still bearing the scars of its failed revolution. Here, in the salons of the Magyar nobility and the quiet beauty of the countryside, the strict protocols of the Hofburg Palace felt a world away. It was in this atmosphere of proud defiance and cultural distinction that he met Laura Skublix de Velike at Bézigneux. Born in 1826 to a respected but minor noble family, Laura was not a commoner, but in the stratified world of the Habsburgs, she might as well have been. She was a woman of substance, cultured, intelligent, and possessing a quiet confidence that stood in stark contrast to the calculated artifice of the Viennese court ladies. Having been previously married and already a mother to 2 daughters, she was a woman of experience, not an innocent girl to be swept away by imperial glamour. Her worldliness was hard won. Her first marriage to a Hungarian nobleman had been a pragmatic arrangement, correct in every social sense but emotionally void. Her life had been a performance of duty, managing a household and upholding a name, yet lacking the warmth of a true partnership. It was a gilded cage that taught her a profound and cynical lesson. A publicly recognized life could be a form of profound loneliness. This understanding stripped away any illusions about imperial glamour. She was drawn not to the Archduke's title, but to the rare promise of a genuine connection with the man himself. For Ernst, a man who had spent 3 decades living a life scripted by others, her authenticity must have been magnetic. She was a connection to a real world, a world beyond duty and dynasty. Their connection was profound. This was not the fleeting affair of an aristocrat. It was a deep emotional bond for a man in his 30s, who had likely resigned himself to a life without true partnership. But to act on this love was to contemplate the unthinkable. He was an Archduke of Austria. She was an impossible match. To petition the emperor for permission would be to invite certain refusal and public humiliation. Faced with an impossible choice between duty and love, between his title and his happiness, Ernst chose a third, far more dangerous path. He chose both. He decided not to seek permission but to act in secret, creating a private reality that would exist in defiance of imperial law. On April 26, 1858, in a quiet private Catholic ceremony in Laibach, modern-day Ljubljana, he secretly married Laura. We can imagine the scene. Not a grand cathedral filled with the aristocracy of Europe, but a small secluded chapel, a loyal priest, perhaps, and a handful of witnesses sworn to absolute silence. This was not a wedding of state, but an act of personal faith and radical commitment. The vows they took were not to bind empires, but to bind their own lives together, whatever the cost. The union was morganatic, a term derived from the Gothic word morgengibe, meaning morning gift. It signified that the wife and any children would receive a financial settlement, but would have no claim to the husband's titles, status, or imperial inheritance. But because this marriage was unsanctioned, even that status was precarious. It was a direct affront to the emperor, Franz Joseph, who enforced the family statute with iron stringency. If discovered, Ernst faced not just disgrace, but potentially the loss of his military command, his income, and his place within the family. Under the vast cover of his military command in Hungary, Ernst began to build his secret world. It was a masterpiece of logistics and deception. Laura assumed the alias Baroness von Walburg, a fabricated title clever in its design. It was noble-sounding enough to allow her and her children to move in local society without raising eyebrows, yet it was a name with no history, a ghost title that would not trigger alarms with the meticulous imperial genealogists in Vienna. Between 1859 and 1863, their hidden family grew. They had 4 children, twins Laura Ernestine and Ernst Heinrich Karl, a second son Heinrich, and a daughter Clotilde. Each birth was a joyous event that had to be shrouded in secrecy, each baptism recorded under the false surname of von Walburg. Behind the dry historical events were the lives of real people. To truly understand the scale of the sacrifice and the 40-year deception, we must delve into the inner worlds of its 3 central figures: the woman at the heart of the secret, the children born into it, and the man who orchestrated it all. Laura Skublix was not a naive girl charmed by imperial glamour. She was a mature woman from the Skublix family, a small but established noble house in Hungary. Before meeting Ernst, she had already been through 1 marriage and was a mother to 2 daughters. This experience likely made her different in Ernst's eyes, a worldly woman, unimpressed by the empty rituals of the court. By accepting the secret marriage, Laura entered a second gilded cage. She had the love of an archduke and lived in comfort, but the price was her very identity. Every day was lived in the heavy silence of the secret. The name Baroness von Walburg was both a shield and a constant reminder of her unofficial status. She could not publicly walk beside her husband at royal events, nor boast of her children's lineage. The fear of discovery was ever present. A curious neighbor, a disloyal servant, a slip of the tongue could shatter everything. Was her love for Ernst great enough to accept a life without status? History does not record her words, but her actions provide the answer. She chose a life of genuine love in the shadows over a socially recognized life that may have been emotionally empty. For Laura, a real family was likely more precious than a hollow title. For Laura, Ernestine, Ernst Heinrich, and Clotilde, their childhood was a beautiful but isolating contradiction. They were born and raised within a secret. Life on the vast Hungarian estate was, in a way, paradise. Nature was their playground. They received an excellent education from the best tutors, and above all, they had the boundless love of their father and mother. But their world was confined to the boundaries of that estate. They became aware of their special status gradually. Perhaps they saw their father's portrait in newspapers, heard people speak of Archduke Ernst, with reverence, and slowly pieced together the difference between that public figure and their warm father at home. Ernst likely explained their situation, framing the silence as necessary to protect their family's peace. They could not attend school with other noble children, could not freely make friends, or boast of their famous father. They were princes and a princess without a kingdom, living lives of material abundance but social scarcity. Their childhood was wrapped in love, but it was also veiled in a mist of mystery and separation. For Archduke Ernst, the 40-year double life was a colossal psychological burden. To the world, he had to maintain the facade of a dutiful, carefree bachelor general. But deep down, he was a husband and father plagued by constant anxiety. Every official tour was in reality a trip home. Every letter he wrote could have contained coded messages. The fear of exposure undoubtedly shaped his character, making him more reserved, cautious, and perhaps lonelier. He could not share the joys or sorrows of his family life with anyone in his circle. Laura's death in 1865 was a devastating blow, multiplying that burden. His partner in secrecy was gone. Now he had to face it all alone. His grief for his wife had to be a silent one, which he could not publicly mourn. From that point on, protecting his children and their secret became his sole purpose in life. His decision to retire early in 1868, immediately after a promotion, can be seen as the act of a father who had decided his private world was now more important than any glory the empire could offer. Their life was a constant juggling act. Ernst maintained his official residence as a corps commander, attending to all the duties his rank required. But he also established a separate private home on a rural Hungarian estate for his real family. This required a small circle of completely loyal staff, servants, and administrators, likely Hungarians who held little affection for the Viennese court, and could be trusted to keep the most consequential secret in the Archduke's life. His life was split in two. For weeks, he would be the consummate Habsburg officer, inspecting garrisons, hosting formal dinners, and writing official reports to Vienna. Then, he would vanish on what was officially a tour of inspection or a hunting trip, but was in reality a journey home to his wife and children. We can picture the coded letters, the carefully managed private financial accounts to avoid imperial audits, and the ever-present gnawing fear of a slip-up, a curious neighbor, a disgruntled servant, a chance encounter with another aristocrat who might ask too many questions. For the children, it was a strange and contradictory upbringing. They lived in comfort, were well educated, and were by all accounts adored by their father. But they lived with a fundamental secret at the heart of their existence. Their father was a famous Archduke of the Imperial house, his portrait appearing in newspapers, his name spoken with deference. Yet they were the von Walburgs. They could never claim him in public, never speak of their connection to the illustrious dynasty that was their heritage. It was a childhood of love, but it was also one of profound isolation, a life lived in the margins of their own family's history. Then tragedy struck, and the secret became a heavier burden. On October 18, 1865, Laura died from tuberculosis, a scourge of the 19th century. Ernst was left a widower at 41, now the sole guardian of their 4 secret children. The loss was devastating, a private grief he could not share with his peers or his imperial relatives. His loving partner in this dangerous deception was gone. The burden of maintaining the secret, of protecting their children, was now his alone, and his resolve to do so only intensified. Tragedy would strike again in 1888, when his younger son Heinrich also died young at the age of 27. These personal sorrows piled up, all hidden behind the stoic, dutiful facade of the Habsburg general. For the rest of his long life, he would carry this dual burden: the public performance of his rank and the private reality of his hidden, diminished family. For 4 decades, the secret held. But on April 4th, 1899, Archduke Ernst died at his villa in Arco, a tranquil town nestled in the Italian Alps, at the age of 74. He had chosen this place for its mild climate and its distance from the Viennese court, a final retreat after a life of internal conflict. His death was quiet, seemingly the peaceful end of a long and dutiful, if unremarkable, royal life. The official court circulars in Vienna announced the passing of an unmarried, childless archduke. The official will was read, naming his legal heirs, his nephews, the sons of his late brothers. With that, the matter should have been closed, his name consigned to the long, orderly list of the Habsburg dead in the Imperial crypt. But the silence was about to be shattered. With Ernst's death, the carefully constructed wall he had maintained for a lifetime immediately crumbled. While the court mourned a bachelor prince, his 3 surviving adult children, Ernst Heinrich, Clotilde, and Laura Ernestine, stepped out of the shadows. They were no longer willing to live as the von Walburgs, a name that was a fiction. They journeyed to Vienna, the heart of the empire that had ignored their existence, not as supplicants, but as claimants. They presented themselves not as the children of a Baroness von Walburg, but as the legitimate biological heirs of Archduke Ernst of Austria. Their arrival sent a shockwave of scandal through the intricate, gossip-fueled world of the Habsburg establishment. Their claim was explosive, and it was backed by what they asserted was irrefutable proof, a document they claimed was the original marriage certificate from the 1858 ceremony in Laibach. This single piece of paper was their weapon, their claim to an identity, and their key to a fortune. The posthumous scandal that unfolded was not merely a family quarrel over money. It was a direct challenge to the emperor's authority and the very foundation of imperial law. The inheritance claims were staggering. The children sought Ernst's entire private fortune, which included 9.682 million gulden in cash, plus vast estates in Hungary and Italy, priceless art collections, and other assets, totaling over 12 million gulden. To put this into perspective, it was a sum equivalent to a modern multi-hundred million euro fortune, placing it among the great private fortunes of Europe. But this was never just about the money. It was about recognition. It was about rewriting their own history from one of secrecy to one of legitimacy. Standing against them, however, was not just a legal challenge, but the full weight of the Habsburg establishment, embodied by the principal official heir, Archduke Friedrich, Duke of Teschen. Friedrich was not a man to be trifled with. He was one of the wealthiest men in the empire, a field marshal in the army, and a staunch, unyielding defender of Habsburg tradition. To him, the claimants were not long-lost cousins. They were opportunistic impostors, threatening the integrity of the imperial house. The battle lines were drawn, the secret family, armed with their single document, against the immense power, wealth, and influence of the dynastic establishment. The case also presented a profound dilemma for the aging emperor, Franz Joseph. Now in his late 70s, the emperor had endured a lifetime of personal tragedy and political crisis. His brother Maximilian had been executed in Mexico. His only son, Crown Prince Rudolf, had died in a murder-suicide pact at Mayerling. His beloved wife, Empress Elizabeth, had been assassinated. The empire itself was creaking under the strain of ethnic nationalism. The last thing he needed was a sordid public scandal that questioned the moral authority and legal infallibility of the imperial family. The affair had to be crushed, swiftly and decisively. The climax of the drama took place in the courtrooms of Vienna in 1908, nearly a decade after Ernst's death. The case had become a sensation, with newspapers across Europe following every development. The claimant's entire case rested on that single piece of paper, the marriage certificate. Their lawyers argued passionately that a Catholic sacrament, a holy vow made before God, should hold more weight than the arcane dynastic statutes of the court. They presented their father's lifelong financial support as proof of his intent to recognize them. For a moment, it seemed they might have a chance, but the empire had mobilized its forces. Acting on direct imperial directives, the state prosecutors prepared to dissect the document. This was not just a legal proceeding, it was an inquest. The court convened a panel of the empire's leading experts, archivists from the imperial household, chemical specialists, and forensic document examiners. In an age before DNA, the science of document analysis was paramount. The certificate was subjected to a level of scrutiny it could not withstand. First, the paper itself. Chemical analysis showed traces of wood pulp, a material that was not commonly used in the high-quality official paper of the 1850s. Then came the ink. Microscopic examination revealed it to be a synthetic aniline ink, a type that only came into widespread commercial use in the 1870s, more than a decade after the certificate was supposedly signed. The writing itself showed signs of being artificially aged, but the final irrefutable blow came from the imperial archives. The prosecutors produced authenticated documents from the parish in Laibach from the exact same period, 1858. When the wax seal on the certificate was compared to the official parish seal, minute but undeniable differences were found. The casting was imperfect. It was a copy. Finally, the signatures of the priest and witnesses were compared to their known, authenticated signatures from other documents. They did not match. The elegant script was a clever imitation, but an imitation nonetheless. The verdict, when it came, was damning. The document was a forgery. The case collapsed spectacularly. The courtroom was stunned. The children's entire claim, their entire public identity, had been built upon a lie. Whether they were knowing participants in the fraud or victims of a desperate attempt by an associate to help them is lost to history. But it did not matter. The court's judgment was swift and merciless. The 1858 marriage was declared legally invalid. Laura Skublix was posthumously deemed a mere consort, not a wife, and the children were declared illegitimate, barred forever from the dynastic fortune they believed was their birthright. But for Emperor Franz Joseph, this was not enough. The legal victory had to be followed by a symbolic annihilation. The scandal had to be erased from the history books. In a final decisive act of imperial power, the emperor issued a decree. It was a stroke of the pen that rewrote 3 lives. The decree mandated the retroactive amendment of all official records, church baptismal ledgers, civil registries. The name von Walburg, the fiction their father had created to protect them, was to be expunged from history. In its place, the children and their descendants were ordered to use their mother's name, Skublix. This was not a simple name change. It was an act of profound social and political branding. It stripped them of the noble predicate von, severing their connection to the aristocracy, and it permanently affixed to them the identity of their non-royal mother, a public and eternal declaration from the emperor himself. You are not and have never been one of us. The imperial intervention was absolute. The secret was not just dismissed. It was officially, legally, and historically unwritten. The emperor's decree was final. The court case was closed. But what became of the children who had gambled their identity and lost? While they were barred from the great prize of the dynastic fortune, it is believed their father had not left them destitute. Through private provisions and trusts established discreetly during his lifetime, Archduke Ernst likely ensured they were left wealthy by ordinary standards. But they were now wealthy commoners with a notorious past, forever excluded from the world they felt was theirs by right of blood. The public humiliation was immense. Overnight, they went from being the mysterious von Walbergs, claimants to a great aristocratic legacy, to simply the Skubliks family, legally branded as the offspring of a fraudulent claim. The scandal would have followed them through the drawing rooms and social circles of Vienna and Budapest. They had dared to challenge the emperor and had been utterly crushed. Their best course of action was to disappear from the public eye, and so they did. Using the wealth they did inherit, they retreated into the anonymity their father had fought so hard to avoid for them. Their descendants dispersed across a Europe that was about to be consumed by the flames of the Great War and the revolutions that followed. They became doctors, teachers, and merchants, living ordinary lives in Hungary, Austria, and beyond. The extraordinary secret of their imperial bloodline faded into a faint, almost mythical family story, a testament to the enduring power and stigma of dynastic exclusion. So what, then, is the legacy of Archduke Ernst and his great dangerous secret? To understand its full significance, we must see his story not as an isolated incident, but as a symptom of a deeper sickness within the late Habsburg dynasty. His quiet, lifelong rebellion was just one unraveling thread in a tapestry that was coming apart at the seams. The pressure to conform, which Ernst had so cleverly navigated through secrecy, was causing other, more spectacular implosions throughout the imperial family. Just 10 years before Ernst's death, the empire was rocked by its greatest scandal, the Mayerling incident. The heir to the throne, Crown Prince Rudolf, a man of liberal ideas trapped in a loveless dynastic marriage, engaged in his own rebellion. But his was a rebellion of despair. He took his 17-year-old mistress, Mary Vetsera, to a hunting lodge at Mayerling, where he shot her before taking his own life. It was a murder-suicide that exposed the rot beneath the glittering facade of the court. Rudolf's rebellion was public, tragic, and self-destructive. Another of Ernst's cousins, Archduke Johann Salvator, chose a different path of rebellion: escape. Hopelessly in love with a commoner, he did what Ernst never dared to do. In 1889, he publicly renounced his titles, his rank, and his Habsburg identity. He took the simple name Johann Orth and, with his wife, bought a ship and sailed away, disappearing forever in a storm off the coast of South America. His was a rebellion of total abdication, and most consequentially, there was the rebellion of the future emperor himself. In 1900, the heir to the throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Ernst's own nephew, insisted on marrying Countess Sophie Chotek, a lady-in-waiting of noble but unequal rank. The crisis brought the monarchy to the brink. Emperor Franz Joseph only consented after forcing his nephew to sign a humiliating oath of renunciation, declaring that his wife would never be empress and his children would never inherit the throne. The protocols surrounding his morganatic wife were a constant source of public humiliation for Franz Ferdinand. It was this very issue of protocol that dictated his route during his fateful visit to Sarajevo in 1914, placing him directly in the path of his assassin's bullet. The shot that killed him and his wife Sophie ignited the First World War and sealed the empire's doom. Seen in this context, Ernst's story is transformed. His secret life was not an anomaly. It was part of a pattern of internal decay. The dynasty's rigid, anachronistic family laws, designed to preserve its power, had become a poison. The very rules meant to ensure order were breeding secrecy, scandal, despair, and even death among its highest-ranking members. The house was dividing against itself. And so, when the empire finally collapsed in the autumn of 1918, it was not merely due to the external pressures of war and nationalism. It was also because the dynasty at its core had become hollow, alienated from the modern world and from the basic human desires of its own members. The final emperor, Karl I, was forced into exile, his own children becoming wanderers, stripped of their titles and their homeland. The fate of exclusion that Ernst's children had suffered decades earlier now became the fate of the entire House of Habsburg. When the cannons of the First World War finally buried the Habsburg Empire, it is often forgotten that the first cracks appeared long before, not on the battlefield, but in the whispering corridors of the court. Archduke Ernst's 40-year silent rebellion was not the cause of the empire's fall, but it was one of its most tragic symptoms. In the end, history erased his children's names from the royal family tree, but history also erased the entire empire that had rejected them. His true legacy lies not in a dynastic record, but in the timeless warning that no wall, not even that of the grandest empire, can ever truly imprison the human heart. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.